All right, Catalyst. It's good to be with you guys today. They miss it. So many people miss. Do I need to be right up on this thing? Mike and I are going to get close. They really miss what this is about. It's not about all of these words. It's not about all the T-shirts. It's not about everything else. It's about relationships. Simple relationships is what sharing the gospel is about. The evangelism, and then we use all these big words. How about we just care about people? That tends to work real well. So let's try that. So today we are in our Discipleshift series. We're in week number 4. And today I have Donald Davis here along with me. So you can say hi, Donald.
Hi, Donald.
There. He's a newcomer. Donald is the camp director at Park Springs. So he takes all of our kids in the summertime and tries making sure that they're safe, and he brings in other youth ministers and stuff, and they take care of all like the programming. But Donald is a guy that I met a long time ago. He was still in youth group when I met him, and I was a youth minister. We're almost the same age. He looks like he's really old, but it's the beard. He's not really that old.
Not as old as you.
Watch your mouth. But we got back together years later when Donald took over the camp, and we started getting together as a group of youth ministers and the camp director, and we got to hang out. And I wanted to bring Donald here when we talked about today our shift in thinking and in actions is how we move from activity to relationships. Because so many of us, like, we want to stay busy. In churches, they want to keep you busy. They want to keep you on Wednesday night and Sunday morning and Sunday night, and then they're offering mission trips, and, like, nothing's wrong with any of those things. Those are all good. But if we don't take those opportunities to actually get to know people, it doesn't work out real well. So we need to move from activity to relationships. So when Donald, you grew up, I didn't grow up in church. Donald grew up in church, good family, 2 parents at home. Tell me about that stuff, man.
So growing up, both my parents, they were always there. We were raised in a Christian home. We were at church every Sunday morning, every Sunday night, every Wednesday night. It was very convenient because our house is right beside of the church we went to. So we walked to church most days till I got older and could drive and got lazy. But everything in our house we did as a unit. We did as a group. And one of the biggest things that we did was during that time, my mom cooked supper every night for our family.
What do you mean supper?
So dinner is the meal in the middle of the day. Supper is the one at night. Can I get an amen on that?
I don't know nothing about that.
There we go. There we go.
The meal in the middle of the day is lunch,
That's
right?
dinner.
Like I
That's
call
dinner.
it lunch. Okay.
So we had supper every night as a family. And my mom would cook, and I have an older brother who's the favorite. And so we would all sit down, the 4 of us, and we would eat a home-cooked meal that my mom would make. And my mom is an amazing cook, as some of the staff members here can attest to. But I remember one of my favorite things that she made and still makes to this day is her 5-flavor pound cake.
Why have I not been invited for the 5-flavor pound cake?
Well, because I don't know.
Jerk.
We're not that close yet.
Whatever.
So my mom would make this 5-flavor pound cake, and it was my favorite thing that she would make, and she still makes it from time to time for other people and for me and special occasions and whatnot. But I remember sitting around the table and having supper with the family, and it wasn't so much my mom's cooking that's most memorable. It's very memorable. Every time I look down, I remember my mom's cooking because that's how I got this fat. But see, you don't need any cake.
Whatever, man.
So, but I remember the conversations that we had at the table. When we sat down at the kitchen table, of course, back then we didn't have cell phones and iPods and whatever else it is they have out there now. We didn't have those distractions. We didn't have a TV in the kitchen. We had to talk to each other. And my parents, I think they did that on purpose. They would ask us about our day. They would ask us what's going on at school. We would talk about the sports that we were involved in, the other activities we were involved in. But a lot of times in our family, it turned into theological discussions. It was an opportunity for my brother and I to sit and have our parents' 100% undivided attention And we would ask questions about God. We would ask questions about church. If there were things that were on our mind that we wanted to talk about, issues we were having with friends, just whatever it was, that was the time that we did that. And I'll always remember the conversations that we had, the relationships that we built, more so than the supper that we had. And I think that foundation that was built years ago, I continue to build on that relationship with my parents. They're still like my best friends in the world, and I still talk to them all the time and ask for advice, and they know what's going on in my life, and I'm the same way with my brother. He's 2.5 years older than I am. He's a youth minister in Austin, Texas, and he and I talk on a very, very regular basis. And, we're all the time bouncing ideas off each other or asking for advice, whatever the case may be. And I think, I really, really think that all that started from having supper together as a family.
So let me ask this. How many of you guys have, I guess it's supper, not dinner, it's supper together every night of the week? Yeah, almost nobody. Oh, there's a few hands. How many of you break out into theological conversations during... we don't very often either. From time to time we do, but Donald grew up sort of old school, right? Obviously he knows from dinner to supper, so there's something. So Donald, your mama's, you said 5 flavor?
5 flavor pound cake.
5 flavor pound cake. So if I got your mom's recipe and I decided I don't like this ingredient, and I took that ingredient out, what would you think about that?
It'd be a 4 flavor pound cake.
We got comedians here today, folks. You're going to pay extra at the door, on your way out. So, but everybody has this recipe.
It would change it completely.
It would change it completely. This is funny, guys. So when I moved out, and Holly and I got married, my mom wrote out all these recipe cards, all of my favorite recipes, right? And she gave them to Holly. And we get down here, and whether it's lasagna or it's her enchiladas or whatever it might be, Holly was cooking them, and it was good. And then all of a sudden, Holly was like, okay, I'm going to switch this a little bit. And I tasted them, that tastes different than Mom's, right? And all of a sudden, but you can't say it's worse, because now we're fighting, right? We can't have those conversations. You just notice that it's different than Mom's. But here's the thing. When God talks to us about how we're supposed to change the entire world, we're supposed to use discipleship. Go make disciples of all nations. This is how it's supposed to happen. Not come to a movie theater and stare at 2 big, one good-looking, one not-so-good-looking guy. He's got the beard. On Sunday morning, he said, do it in relationship with each other. So if we want to have the same results that God wanted us to have, why are we changing the methods that God's gave us? It just doesn't make any sense that we would be able to have that. So it's like this recipe. If we change this recipe, everything would be messed up. Nothing would be right. But over the years in the church, what we have done is said, what we're going to do is we're going to plan a bunch of activities. We're going to have Sunday school. We're going to have VBS. We're going to have adult Bible study. We're going to have fellowships and mission trips and youth groups and church, just trying to stay as busy as we can. And we think if we run into each other enough, somehow or another, our lives are changed. But we all know better than that. We all go to work 40-plus hours a week, and your life isn't changed by those people there, so why in the world would it be changed unless you decide that you have got to get into these deep relationships with these people? And we're going to look at this today at 2 different personalities here. We're going to be in a scripture. It's Luke chapter 10, verses 38 through 42. Now, when we get into this, we have 2 sisters here, and the 2 sisters are sisters of one of Jesus' best friends, Lazarus. We know the story later on where Lazarus is about to die, and they're like, the one you love, you've got to come. Jesus is like, give me just a second. I'll be there in a second. Lazarus dies, and then Jesus shows up, and he's like, he's just sleeping. Y'all don't know any better. He's just sleeping, and raises him back up from the dead, which is cool. But these are the 2 sisters that we run into here. So in Luke chapter 10, verses 38 through 42, it says, Jesus and his disciples were on their way, and he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her house to him. She had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet, listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself?" See, sister's fighting and stuff. She's making me do all the work. She won't help out. And things don't change. I got 2 girls. It's just like this. She's doing all the work by myself. Tell her to help me. And Jesus says, Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you are worried and upset about the many things, but the few things that are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. So Jesus and his guys are walking down the road. They're needing a place to stay. You see your best friend's sister coming out. She's like, hey, y'all get to come hang out with me tonight. And you're like, that seems perfect. And this is where we get into this. And Donald and I were talking about this week a little bit, about what this looks like in the personalities. So let me ask this. How many people do we have here that are the oldest? Us firstborns who run the world, right? We are the ones who take over everything. Okay. Who are all the babies in the audience? Like youngest, we saw y'all coming. Like you just got to make a big deal about everything. We saw you coming. You ain't helping with the dishes. You didn't help then. You ain't helping now. We know how that goes. So this is sort of what's going on here with Mary and Martha, I believe. You've got the detail-oriented sort of older sister, and then you've got the one who's like, I'm just going to hang out. Like mom's going to tell me what to do, and maybe I do it, and maybe I don't. But Jesus shows up, and she's like, I'm just hanging out with Jesus. And we see these 2 different personalities here. As we see these 2 different personalities here, when we were going through and I was choosing these topics, over the last, 5 weeks now, I've had 4 different people help me speak. We're talking about discipleship. There's no reason to get up and talk about discipleship by yourself. Donald is somebody that I've been discipling over the last year and a half.
Yeah.
Year and a half. So I was like, all right, Donald, what you think about coming to Catalyst? Help me talk about this. What do you think?
We got this.
We got this. Absolutely. We're killing this. Why are we a good team? How does that work out for us?
The reason that Scott and I are such a good team on this topic is because we are each of these personalities. Scott is very much the Mary type. He's very relational, very much into talking to people and growing the deeper relationships and really getting to know folks. I'm very much the opposite.
Yes. You said it, not me.
I am not the very relational person. I am very task-driven. I'm the doer. I like to find projects, get them done, move on to the next one. And I'm not really one to sit around and talk about my feelings and grow deeper relationships and everything.
I know that's hard to guess by looking at him, right? He doesn't like to talk about his feelings. Yeah, he likes feelings.
A lot of times in my day-to-day life, in my life itself, I have to remind myself to slow down, to stop and smell the roses. 9 months out of the year, I live on 40 acres by myself, and it's amazing. It's a small slice of heaven. And I love that. You know, I love my solitude. I love being able to do my own thing, and to be completely honest, to not have to worry about relationships. It does kind of cause issues in the dating world, but whatever. But I have to remind myself to take that time and to relax, and that I am supposed to build those relationships with other people. And that's one of the things that I really want to stress is if you're sitting out there right now and you're thinking, well, I'm in trouble because I'm a Martha, I'm a doer, I don't like people, like whatever the case may be. I want to stress to you that that's not necessarily how this works. That the Bible is very specific in saying that Martha is the one who went and sought out Jesus. She's the one who went and found him. She's the one who invited him to the house. She's the one who was making the preparations, whatever it was that needed to be done. She is the one who was the doer. And so she went after it. She made it happen. Now the problem is that that while they were sitting there, she didn't find that balance.
Yeah.
And she was strictly looking at the task at hand. She wanted to make sure everything was right, everything was perfect, and she forgot about the other part that's also important.
Yeah, we run into this at my house. So when we do things at my house, we'll have people over or whatever it might be, and you can start to tell about a few hours before, because my wife's just sort of like everything, like oh, there's dust in the corner that she hadn't seen in 6 months, but all of a sudden, like, the dust has to be done, and we have to cook all these things, we have to bake all these things. Then all the dishes have to be washed and put away, and I don't mean hidden in the dishwasher. I mean washed and put away because people are going to look in our dishwasher, I guess. I don't know exactly how that happens, but somehow or another, she gets all task-driven, oriented, and I'm like, let them see who we really are. Like, everybody got dirty dishes. We'll be just fine. That doesn't completely work in her mind that way. So we've been figuring out how in the world this sort of works and goes together, and hey, we need some seats here, right? Hey, we got a good problem here today. If everybody can, like, scoot a little closer together and give our folks some seats, except for Josh here. He don't need a seat. He don't like friends. We don't really like him, so it works out. So, but when we start looking at this, we have these relationships. So Martha did a great job Martha went out and got Jesus, right? Martha went out and got Jesus. Great job. She was like, something needs done, or Jesus is walking around. I'm going to take care of him. Okay, Jesus, come on in. We're taking care of you. And then she's cleaning pots and pans, and she's scrubbing the floor, and she's like, she's missing out on Jesus. How in the world does that happen, that you miss out on time with Jesus? She knew who he was at that point. She recognized, like, the stuff this guy is doing is sort of crazy. Like, maybe I should sit and listen. Maybe I should try to figure out what's going on here. But she got so caught up in her personality that she missed time with Jesus. I'm sure none of you out there are like that at all. You get caught up in your work, and you get caught up around what's got to be done around the house. You get caught up in whatever it might be. Or you get caught up in a ton of relationships, and you got to maintain all these relationships. Donald does this. You got, how many churches you got to hang out with and run around to?
30 churches. So
30 churches Donald goes and sees every year. Really hard to have deep relationships when you're trying to keep up with 30 of them. So that's sort of hard on the relational side, is to have these deep relationships. But here's the thing is, the deep relationships, well lived, are a practice for deep relationships with God, well lived. Bella, can you find that for me? Deep relationships with God, well lived, are nothing more than a practice for deep relationships with people, well lived, are nothing more than practice of deep relationships, well lived. This is the thing. If we can't have deep relationships with each other, how in the heck are we supposed to do it with somebody we don't ever see? Here's a hint. You don't. And that's where most of us have run into walls or dropped the ball or whatever you want to see, is like, I feel like my relationship with Jesus is struggling. Why is that? Because it is. Why? Because if you're like me and you're a relational type person, you're relating to everybody. Everybody. That's the thing that I run into. And I've got to be very intentional to put down roots and say, okay, these people, I'm going to pour my life into. I'm going to do everything that I can to get into deep relationships with these people. Whereas Donald, on the other hand, does have the, I've got to keep relationships with 30 different churches and how many different ministers or whatever, but he struggles with all the details. He was like, well, I've got to keep the camp going. These trees have to get done, and I got to look at staff, and I got to email, and I got websites, and I all these different things that have to get done. So both of us, both Mary, both Martha, I think had problems here. We just didn't see him full circle. But all of us here fall into this place at one point in our lives or another, is that we fall into not going deep with our relationships. And until we go deep with our relationships, we can't really get certain things done. We have a whole bunch of activity, not a whole bunch of relationships. And that's churches in general today. And sometimes, as much as I fight it, it's us in here. Because here's the thing, I can't live your life for you. I can't make you have deep relationships. I can only try doing a good job with mine. But if you don't have deep relationships with people, at your work, at your church, if your relationships with your husband, wife, kids, whatever, aren't deep enough, that's not my fault. You need to figure that out. And you need to choose. Some of these things just aren't going to happen anymore, whether they're the details that Donald deals with, or they're the million different relationships that I deal with. You have to move from activity to relationship. See, Martha, we had this Martha mentality, right? So Martha was all about the draw and less about the impact. The Martha mentality, it's all about the draw and less about the impact. Donald, we were going through here, and Donald and I were writing our own little spiels here. Donald came up with this, and I was like, I'm stealing that in a second.
Jerk.
All day long. It doesn't even bother me. I think my first name is Jerk when I'm hanging out with Donald. It's all right. It's all right, as my wife calls me too. But anyways, we have this Martha mentality. I know preachers have this all the time because we have to have seats full, right? Otherwise, I feel like I'm not doing my job. If we got these empty seats, I'm not doing my job. I want to draw people. It's less about the impact. And it's like, I think we're missing it there. So, Donald, what do you see going on here? What am I talking about here? What do you think about this?
Well, you just read my whole part, so we'll skip to the next one.
We'll go to the next one.
No, growing up in the church, we always saw there were people there to pour into us. Within the youth group, we had youth ministers, other ministers. We had counselors, parents, my parents. They were always involved in what we did within the youth group, and they poured into us constantly. And as I grew older, I noticed how important that was. And I saw the impact that it made on my life. But then also I saw when I started getting older and the younger kids started looking up to me like I did the older kids that were in the youth group, I saw the impact that I could have on their life. And so we started to spend some time together outside of church. We'd do cool activities. We would go hang out. We would sit in the Waffle House parking lot in King at all hours of the morning and we just hang out and spend time together. And it wasn't about the activities that we did. It was about the relationships. And like I said, a lot of times when it comes to church activities, or like Scott said earlier, we have a Martha mentality. Yeah. Where we look at the draw, we look at the numbers that are coming in, and we don't look at the purpose of what we're doing or the depth of what we do. We need the numbers, and we got to have the numbers. But at the same time, in order for the numbers to grow like they should, we have to have the content that goes along with that. I see this a lot with men's groups. I deal with a lot of different, not just church groups, but also smaller groups within churches. Women's groups, men's groups, quilters groups, all kinds of groups who use the camp.
He's joking.
And I'm not joking. They use us twice a year. They do amazing stuff. You should come visit sometime. Especially with men's groups, we see this a lot. You get a couple men together and they say, hey, we're gonna form a men's group at church and we're gonna start hanging out together and we're gonna do manly stuff. We're gonna hunt, we're gonna fish, we're gonna shoot guns, we're gonna blow stuff up, we're gonna do all the whatever stuff that manly men do. And that's what they do. However, they don't build the relationships that go along with it. They think that that's the full content and that's as far as it goes, is just doing stuff together as men. Well, then you start running into issues. You have men who are having troubled marriages. You have men who have having trouble with their kids, and their kids hate them, or they hate their kids, or however that works. And it could have been prevented. Divorces could have been prevented. Addictions could have been helped. There's so many things that could have happened had the focus been different, and it be relational and not just the activity. Now, I struggle really hard with my staff. When we get into all this relational stuff. If you ask my staff, they will tell you I'm not at all relational. I'm very much work-focused and drive-focused. But I try to, or I have to be, and I learned this from Scott, I have to be intentional in my relationships with them. I have to try really, really hard to get to know them and to, to be there for them. We have a joke at camp about encouragement, and that being my spiritual gift, because that's something I struggle with. And so I have to try really hard in order to make that happen. And no, I don't have heartfelt conversations with my staff on a weekly basis or a daily basis or ever sometimes. But I do try to make sure that my staff understands that I'm there for them. And that if they ever need me, they're more than welcome to call me. I'll do anything I can to help them. I want them to understand that, and I have to try really hard in order to make that happen.
So when we look at this, guys, we're notorious for this, right? Like, we'd like to just get together and cry on each other's shoulders and, like, pour out here's where my wife hurt me emotionally this week, and I don't know what to do. What do you guys do? Like, we're so bad at that. Like, that just doesn't happen. We don't get into that. But that happens to all of us. We actually do have emotions. So I'm wondering, so when Jesus walks in, he's hanging out there with Mary and Martha, it doesn't tell us what they were talking about. But here's what I know. Good leaders move into the depth of those conversations because we care about other people. When Donald and I and these other guys start meeting together, normally what I do is I go in and I just here's all my struggles, boom, and drop them down. They're sort of like, I don't know what to do with that. Like, nobody does that.
We usually just pray.
That works too. I can use some prayer.
What are you going to do?
Yeah, see? But people don't do that. They don't share how they're really hurting. I heard this twice last week. I listened to this podcast, and there was a group of ministers that had been meeting for 10 years. And a minister came into their group. They had coffee every Monday for 10 years. And one of the preachers walked in, and he was like, guys, I'm divorcing my wife. I've got this other woman I've been hanging out with. I'm gone. And all the preachers were like, what have we been doing for 10 years that we have no idea that this is going on in this guy's life? We've been drinking coffee, and we've been talking theology, and we've been talking golf and hunting and whatever we talk about, and we don't care about each other really. We should have known after 10 years of coffee Monday morning, we should have known what this guy was going through. But they didn't. Why? Because we stay all busy, right? We stay all busy. We keep it above, sea level here. No one wants to admit that their marriage is struggling. No one wants to admit that they're struggling with some sin, they're struggling with some addiction, that their kids aren't perfect, that their parents aren't perfect. But here's the thing we all know. All of us have those issues. For some reason, we try to hide it from each other, but all of us have those issues going on in our lives, and we don't, we're afraid to talk about them. So we just keep these activities going. Our churches are notorious for this. We keep activities going, and if we're always together, and we're always running around, and we're always staying busy, and we're always doing this and that, then we never have a chance to sit down and say, okay, are you loving your wife like Christ loved the church? No, I'm struggling right now. She drives me crazy. Agreed. I have that from time to time too. So how do we work through this? How do we handle that together? And you got to figure that out. So what we do here is we have all these activities, and we don't have dinner like Donald used to have sitting down. Supper. They never ate lunch/dinner together. It always was supper, I guess. He is awfully young to be old school like this, but okay, whatever. But they sat down together, and they had these times together. Have you seen those commercials where they're out, like the parents are on their phones, and the kid's like, hey, I was in school, played it today. It was great. And they're like, oh, cool, when do you need money for it? I wasn't talking about money at all. Or you got the one where the grandparents are there, and they got their metal detectors, and the kids are coming in. They got to go through, and they're hiding everybody's phones because they want to have conversations. But we don't have time for conversations. We're too busy for conversations. It's much easier to have it over Facebook and everything. It's much easier to have it over Twitter or Snapchat or whatever else is going on out there that I don't know about because I keep you at arm's length. And we don't have to have real relationships. But here's the thing. If we can't have real relationships with each other, there's no way we're going to have real relationships with God. It's just near impossible to have someone looking you in your eyes and you keep them at arm's length besides a God who you don't see looking you in your eyes. You got to put in extra work and extra effort to make that happen. But we don't like to do that. So as we were talking about here, Donald's at camp, so he sees a week of high schoolers, 2 weeks of middle schoolers,
a week of 4th and 5th graders, a half a week of 2nd and 3rd graders, and then 48, no, not quite 48. We counted it down. Was it like 36 hours of a parent and a child?
A parent and a child. So what do you see as all of our kids from all of our churches from everywhere? What do you see about our relational skills?
Well, the trend that we see at camp is that, and it's not just the youngest, it's all the way up, even into college kids, that people don't know how to communicate anymore. They don't know how to talk to one another. They don't know how to have conversations. You know, I see it with the younger counselors that come in from different churches to help. I see it with staff members from time to time. And I really do think that it's directly tied to the lack of face-to-face communication and verbal communication that people have these days. Kids, you know, their tablets, phones. I don't know all the devices that are out there because I don't do electronics. But kids don't go out and spend time together anymore. They don't have imaginations. They're using somebody else's imagination, whatever's on that tablet or whatever's on that phone. They're not creative anymore, and they don't learn to communicate in all situations. We learned to communicate because we had, well, I learned to communicate because I had disagreements with people. You learn how to work through that. You have, you know, happy times with people. You learn how to express yourself. You learn how to talk. You learn how to communicate. You learn how to do all that. But now we have kids who are, you know, constantly on, you know, Twitter or Snapchat or FaceSpace or whatever's out there, and they're constantly using that as means of communication, even when they're sitting beside each other or they're a couple feet away from each other. And so they don't learn how to do effective face-to-face communication. We see the struggles at camp where kids can't tell you, you know, if you ask them a specific question, how do you feel about this? They can't put it into words. They can't communicate with you. We also see issues where they don't understand certain parts of the English language, like sarcasm. That's my second language.
I was going to say, you got that one.
And so that's a problem. Growing up and being in society, going to job interviews, you know, everything that comes with growing up, being an adult, and being a productive member of society, there's a struggle there because there's no way to communicate. And in the church, that rolls over into our whole conversation today about building relationships with one another, about going deeper with one another, about sharing your feelings, sharing your emotions, talking about what's going on in your life. We're seeing the younger generation is not able to do that because everything is through this.
Yeah, and so when we're able to slow down and leave time, we're able to get into these relationships. You know, all of Scripture is you know, summed up on relationships. Jesus said, love God, love others. Everything is built on relationships. He said, all of the teachings hang on these two, love God and love others. And if we can't slow down enough to have these impactful, deep relationships, then we're really just missing out. So I heard this a couple of times this week as I was listening to that same podcast. If you go deeper in relationships with fewer people, those relationships go further. If you go deeper with fewer relationships, those relationships go further. How do we know this is right? Because all of us are sitting here 2,000 years later because of what Jesus did with 12 guys. 12. And then he had his 3 inside of that. That's how we know that this works. Is you don't try having relationships with 30 churches and all the ministers and all the quilting groups and all the youth groups and all the children's groups and all the everything. You got to choose a few people and say, here's where I'm opening up and who I really am. And when you're able to do that, the game really changes. So over the last year and a half, we've been getting together, and the youth ministers and Donald, we've all been getting together and trying to be intentional about these relationships. When I first got this group together, I was like, okay, like we're going to go do these activities, we're going to do this and that. Every time I get them together, like I'm like, okay, what do I teach? What do I lead? Where do we go? What do we do? And they're like, how about we go to lunch? Or I'll ask like, hey guys, how's the last week gone? And there's always something that comes up. And as we're able to do that, we're able to go in these different relationships. We're able to move from activity into relationships. Was that a new thing when we brought you in and we started doing this, or was that something that had happened earlier and you forgot about, or how'd that work?
To some extent it was. You know, it's nice to have a group of people who have the same mentality, who understand your day-to-day life, who understand your struggles within your career and everything else, and to be able to have those conversations, be able to rely on those people, but also to be able to trust those people. With it being such a tight-knit group that we have, we talk about personal things, and it doesn't go any further than where we are. And you know, we talk about it, we hash it out, we get advice, And I think one of the biggest things that I have found during those meetings and during that whole process was that I'm unable to pour into other people if I'm empty. And that's one of the biggest things about this group, is that we come to one another, we talk to each other, and we pour into each other to make sure that we're always full, to make sure that we're always able to do our jobs effectively. A minister gets burnt out, dried up really, really quick. And that happens because no one's pouring into them. Some of that may be, their own fault, that they haven't sought someone else to pour into them, someone to talk to, someone to help them, someone to get them through the tough times. But, a lot of times it's the church's fault. We put ministers, I did growing up, we put ministers on a pedestal. They got it all together. They got it all figured out. They're good. They got Jesus, and they talk to him all day, every day, and he gives them everything they need. They got this thing figured out. That's what I'm going to aspire to be. As I've gotten older, gotten to know more ministers, I realized that they're just as terrible as all the rest of us. And, they have struggles too. They have problems too. They need those people to encourage them, to pour into them, to help them, to be there for them. And so during this group that we have formed, then we have really built those relationships. And it's not about the activities. We had great aspirations of all these activities that we were going to do. We fell into the trap.
Yeah.
And then once we got together, started spending time together, started building relationships, pouring into each other, we don't even do those activities, and it's a great time together.
So as we finish up here, because he said this, and I wanted to throw this out. He said most people think that the preachers got their stuff together because it's them and Jesus all the time. That wasn't good enough for Adam when God first created him. You go through Genesis, and everything is good, and everything is good, and everything is good, and then he creates Adam. And Adam and God are walking together in the garden, physically. And God said it's not good for man to be alone. And he created somebody else. Not your minister, not your spouse, not your kids. It's not good for anybody to be alone. Them and somebody else and God works real well. But you cannot do that from your own. So I want to talk about this just for a second as we're summing up here. We're going to hit this real quick. I want to be intentional. How do you be intentional, move from activity to relationships at work and home and in the church? At work, you have to be intentional with fewer people. You have to be intentional. You're not going to accidentally let something slip and then people are like, oh, I have the same problem too. You've got to choose to go to lunch with the same people, to hang out with the same people, to have them over to your house outside of lunch, outside of work, outside of whatever, and let them see who you really are. That's how that works out at work. In the home, Donald, was talking about dinner.
Yeah, supper. So the big thing, in being in your home and building those intentional relationships, parents, I want to encourage you to be intentional in building strong relationships with your child. Build that foundation now. And really pour into your children. Be involved in the things that they're involved in. Support them in the things that they do. Be there for them. Be open with them. Talk to them. Let them know you have struggles also. A lot of times, I hear that from kids. I can't talk to my parents about this because, I struggle with it and, I don't want them to know about it, yada, yada, whatever. Well, we all have struggles. We've all had struggles, and we're all going to have struggles.
Yes.
Not just as your children, but, as your kids being your brothers and sisters in Christ, you're supposed to be there for them and you're supposed to help them through that. Children, I know there's not a lot of children here, but there's some teenagers and whatnot. Be intentional with your parents. Be intentional with your relationship with them. Get to know your parents. Get to know as much about your parents as you can. Look to them for guidance. Look to them for wisdom. Help your parents grow in their relationship with God. Let them help you grow in your relationship with God. Your parents, if they're anything like my parents, they get a whole lot smarter the older you get. Yeah. And you need to know that. So make sure you build those relationships with your family as a unit, because then once your unit splits up, once your kids go to college, grandkids, whatever the Lord leads everybody, you're still going to have that foundation. You're still going to have that relationship.
I mean, parents, how would you like to have a better relationship with your kids to leave the house than you have right now? I know so many people that don't have a relationship with their parents anymore. Why is that? Because it wasn't invested in while they were there. So when they left, why in the world would it keep going? The last place is at church. How do you invest in people intentionally at church? It doesn't happen in here on Sunday mornings. All of you guys are facing me, facing Donald. It doesn't happen in here on Sunday mornings. It doesn't happen in connection groups unless you're really intentional about it. You got to invite people to your house. You got to go outside and do lunch. It can't be all structured in the church all the time, or it just becomes activity. How about you go see a movie together? How about you just hang out and have dinner together? You smoke a cigar. You do whatever you do. That's how it happens. You have to be intentional about building into relationships, and if you don't do that, you're going to constantly be Martha, running around, being too busy, cooking, cleaning, all of the above, and you're going to miss out on Jesus in your life, in your children's life, and whatever it might be. I'm going to go ahead and pray, and we're going to move into our time of communion and then into worship. And then if you guys want to talk to Donald afterwards or any of his staff, make sure to find them out there. They do a great job of putting on these camps for us. They also do like retreats. If you're like, hey, we'd like to do a retreat for our business or whatever the heck it might be, they've got some cool things they can do out there that'll help out with that. So make sure to check up with them. I'm going to pray and we'll move out of here. Father God, I thank you for today. I thank you for Donald and his life, and I thank you for the last year and a half or so.